Hello, this is a time lapse of a pet portrait that I did. This is going to be slightly different to what I usually do in the fact that I don't use the oil brush in this one. As you can see, I'm blocking in colour using the pastel, so I'm using the chalk pastel. I found this to be very realistic in the way it feels, and I thought I would want to put in a bit of texture for this portrait. And as you can see, I have the reference on the left hand side, and I am just basically, it's just a straightforward copy. I'm not planning on really stylizing this too much at all. The chalk is on quite high pressure for this. This is mainly because I am blocking in. Later on I'll look to reduce that a bit more, but as you can see, the texture is coming out quite nicely on it. I don't tend to go for a particularly textured background. Just pulled out the top level view, which is always something I do quite quickly. I tend to keep my eyes quite a lot on the right hand side just to see that everything is looking okay. But I don't tend to zoom in too much anyway to my art. I've now just pulled out the palette knife and on the soft mode, which is my favourite mode, and pulling out some hairs, already adding detail. I think maybe I'm adding detail a bit too early on here, but hey ho, this was experimenting. I was too eager, I think, to get into the detail of it, and I wanted to jump straight into the eyes possibly a bit too fast. I've now switched to pencil mode and going straight in there. With a pencil you also get a bit of texture. It works with the canvas as well, and that's also what I wanted, a natural feel for this painting. Always go for the eyes quite early on because that's going to be the focus of this portrait, and also using the pencil tool to work in more detail. Just carrying on with pencil, lots of zigzag movements to generate a bit of randomness to get the texture to come out with the fur. Bit of experimentation. I'm going to be using the pencil and the palette knife to pull out some detail here. As you can see, I'm just zooming around my reference and focusing on particular areas. Just speed this up a bit. This is at an early stage, blocking things in, going backwards and forwards using the pencil and then the pastel. Back to the palette knife there, building in a bit more detail, refining things a bit. You may see there that what I did is I was happy with where I was, and I took a copy of where I got to and put it into a layer right at the bottom of my layer panel on the right hand side. I do this quite often. I've been recently getting out of the habit of doing that a little bit more because it increases the size of your ArtRage files, and also I don't tend to go back too much to what I've done in the past. It's me setting a baseline where I get to decent points in my painting, and I just keep it within the ArtRage file. Typically these days I do a bit more exporting and export it to an image, and I'm quite happy just to import it again. Of course, if you keep the layer and you just copy it, it maintains all the bump information and all the thickness of the paint, which I do quite like, but I don't really too often go back on what I've previously done and take out what I've done. As you could see there, I was just using the palette knife and the wet option, which was blurring around the edges of the portrait, because I have an idea of what I want to do with this, and it really is a case of blurring everything else around the face of the cat and pushing the background into the back and therefore bringing the face forward, and then your eye will be drawn to the detail around the eyes is the main aspect of it, and as you move further backwards you will gradually lose detail. I'm now working on just copying from reference really and just building in the body, and I'm not sure if I'm completely happy with that. It's something, again, I'm just blocking in and using on a different layer underneath what I've already got. Layers very useful in this case. Usually I don't use too many layers. I like to keep it quite simple, almost pretty traditional. Playing around with it, I wasn't quite happy with that. I was playing around with the colours a little bit to try and get it to match the main face, but I've given up on that for the moment. I'll come back to it. Laying in a bit more detail here with the pastels, adding a bit more variation in contrast, adding in some light here. Bit of rim almost, if you can call it rim, on a furry cat face. Just adding in more detail. I do have a habit on my art of outlining things. I know I shouldn't do it, but I do anyway, because hey ho, it's what I like to do, so why not do it? I'm playing around with things. I was moving the body because I couldn't quite get the body right regarding the reference, so I thought I would just move things around, and deciding to add in a bit more detail using the stamp brush that we've got here, the sticker spray brush, using my favourite bear fur, which comes pre-installed as part of the default presets of ArtRage, and seeing if I can get it to fit in with my current art. Alright, so I'm at the stage at the moment where I'm starting to add in more detail, and I'm a bit lazy. I like to stamp things in with the sticker spray and use usually overlay blend mode. But I don't overdo it. It's a subtle thing, and of course having it in a separate layer I can change the opacity of it. Sometimes I even change the blend mode, and the blends may work quite well. Not quite sure whether this is all fitting in. It's a bit of an experiment really. I think I was kind of happy with it, therefore I merged down into a layer, which I always like to do as much as I can do to merge everything down. Now adding in a bit more detail, and I'm starting to pull out some bright lights now. I will have this layer in a color dodge blend mode, which I really do like, but you need to be careful with that because it saturates and also it brings out the highlights. And of course the focus on this was the eyes. You can see that I brought the eyes out a bit more than the reference indicates, but that's a conscious stylized decision. Of course this is a piece of art and you can do what you want with it. Thinking about the background again now. I do want a darker background because it will bring the face forward. Putting in some almost end level details. It was the things that I was holding back on, was all the whiskers. I didn't want to put them at an early stage because because I'm typically working, although I've got this on a separate layer, I still want to merge this one down as soon as possible. And adding in some more detail. Again, I am avoiding doing the background aspect of it, but I can see on the right hand side with the top level view it's looking okay. It's looking alright. It's almost looking, the idea that I initially had to a certain extent was to just have a face, but I do want to do that background. And there's a case on this that I could just keep adding in more and more detail. I could change to the pencil as I'm doing here. I can do more fur. I could go fur crazy. But in the end, you do get to a point where you get diminishing returns. You could work on this for 10 hours or something and get it to have all the fur, every single item of fur, every hair is there. But I don't really want it. One, I'm slightly lazy, so I don't want to do it anyway. And two, I think you lose the effect and you can start to overwork painting. As you can see on the right hand side in the layers, I've got a single layer, and now I'm playing around with blend mode, so I'll have this in overlay just to try and bring some colour out and to bring some lighting out. Again, I'm taking a backup of what I had, but I was happy with where I was. And now I thought I would cheat because I wasn't really getting the background particularly well, and I just use a tracing layer and just worked it in that way. Sometimes I do this, again, because I'm generally quite lazy. Now I'm starting to work my own. And also because I traced it just to get the blocks in and just to get the rough colour in there, but it was only simple blocks that I was doing anyway. It's not as if I was tracing anything more detailed. Now I want to push the face forward. The palette knife has now come out and I'm using the wet blender, which is quite an interesting concept. And of course you can mix media with digital tools in the fact that I can apply a wet blender on pastels and I'm not messing all the paper up or anything, which is quite handy. And I like the effect of this in that it's really bringing out the eyes and the fur, and that body in the background still isn't really working. I think what I'm probably going to end up doing is just really blurring it a lot. It really sits into the background. If your eye is drawn too much towards it, and I just want to take that out. Bit of experimenting, putting some blur, undoing, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted a light background or a dark background or textured or not. Playing around here with the colour fill on different textures on a different layer, and I think I was quite happy with that, so I brought it to the background. It's looking okay. I'm kind of quite happy with it. I'm not going to add in the grass from the reference. I think I'm quite happy with the texture that I've introduced in the background, which I think is a default texture as well, which is supplied in ArtRage, which is, I think, the wooden panel. I think that's right, or something like that anyway, which I use quite often in my backgrounds because it adds a warmer tint and also it's a really nice texture, and it's not overdone. It sits well in the background. I'm getting pretty happy with this. What I'm doing now is I'm importing into Picasa 3 and I'm tweaking things, tweaking the colours, playing around a bit. Picasa makes life a lot easier. It has been discontinued now by Google, but it still works and it's nice, quick and easy, and just export it as an image, playing around with things. I typically just increase the sharpness slightly, and I'm playing with a blur as well, which I actually use in the end to push the background even further back. And now I've just imported, and as you can see the contrast was a lot better and it just brings things out. And that's the final thing. As you can see, the combination of many different aspects to bring out the detail, and the background was blurred quite a lot in the end, but I think I was happy with that because it brings your focus into the face, which is what it was all about. Okay, thank you very much.